board of AWWA New Jersey and I welcome you to the 8th edition of the Living History Project. I am John Savardi and I currently serve as chair of the Retired Professionals Committee and have been involved with the committee and this section for many years. For those of you who are not familiar with the Living History Project, our goals have not changed since the project's inception. The project is a documentary series where retired industry professionals speak about their water industry experiences. They share with us their stories, their viewpoints of the section, and how changes in local and national regulations have changed the landscape of our profession. The main goal of the project is to record and document the history of the section and water history in New Jersey. However, we hope that we realize two additional benefits. The first is to encourage high school seniors, college students, and others to choose a career in the exciting and rewarding water industry. The second is to give young professionals in the industry a historical perspective on the drinking water profession and the people that had a significant impact on shaping the industry. For our 8th edition of the Living History Project, we are honored to be interviewing Neil Goldfine, James Glozzy, and James Dyksen. Our first guest today is Neil Goldfine. Neil Goldfine is a licensed professional engineer and professional planner. He has a water treatment T3 and W3 licenses. He started out his career working as a manager for the Atlantic Coastal Basin of the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection and worked there from 1970 to 1980. And then, since 1980, he has been executive director of the Atlantic City Municipal Utilities Authority. Please join us as Stacy Fizz interviews Neil Goldfine.
Neil, thank you for coming today, and on behalf of the board, the section, and the Retired Professionals Committee, we'd really like to thank you for agreeing to do this interview today.
Stacy, it's my pleasure.
Thank you. You retired over a year ago, correct?
Yes.
And how did you become involved in the water industry?
Actually, I've considered the way my life is going as I've always been in the right place at the right time. When I was a senior in high school, I was offered 4 or 5 summer jobs, and one of my neighbors said, "Hey, that one's right near where I work, I'll give you a free ride to work." And it was about an hour ride, so that was a considerable issue. It happened to be working for the Department of Interior for one of the predecessor agencies to EPA. This was before EPA was formed, and it was actually the Federal Water Quality Administration.
Nice. I like that. So tell us about your career. I mean, you started with the Department of Interior, and now you moved into water or wastewater?
Actually, I had ended up getting 3 summer internships with the federal government, which evolved to different agencies, but it's basically all the things that eventually became EPA. And then that sort of died out because of the federal government's programs, and I had a friend at school who helped me get a job with the Maryland Department of Health, and that agency then became the Department of Environmental Conservation for the state of Maryland when that was formed in 1970. When I was in school, I took a lot of job interviews, and it wasn't exactly a good time for engineers graduating. There's a little bit of a recession going on, but they were forming in 1970, on Earth Day, they were forming all these brand new departments of environmental protection. And I was offered a job with a number of them, but I picked New Jersey. I thought New Jersey was a good place to work, and it had a beach. So it became my choice, and I ended up being assigned in the wastewater field. And I worked there for about 10 years, actually exactly 10 years. My first and last days were exactly the same. And while I was there in the wastewater field, a gentleman came into my office and asked about grants for wastewater in Atlantic City. And I was talking to him for a while about it, and I asked him his role. He said he was the deputy executive director. And I said, "Oh, do you have an executive director?" And he said, "No." I said, "Are you looking for one?" He said, "Yes, we are." And being the typical state employee, I had an up-to-date resume in my drawer. And I pulled it out and I said, "Well, I'm interested. I mean, how can you..." Atlantic City had gambling had passed. Atlantic City was building casinos. It was a high growth area. It also had a beach. So how could I turn down a job like that? I gave him my resume. The chairman called me a couple of weeks later. I went down and interviewed, and they hired me. In Atlantic City, the water department had been under the city for forever. And they had a little budget crisis, and they sold the water department to the MUA. And they didn't have an executive director. So I was the first executive director in Atlantic City. And they had only purchased the water utility about 7 months before I started. And so I got down there, and 33 and a half years later, I decided it was time to take a break and leave.
During your career, you were active in the section, AWWA New Jersey, and you're still active in the section. Can you tell us about some of your experiences there?
Well, when I first got down to Atlantic City, I had a couple of deputies who were very active in different organizations that didn't really want to step on their feet. So I stayed away from AWWA at the beginning of my career there. I was in, I think, 1985 or 86, the keynote speaker at the conference. The chair of the section was a gentleman named Curtis Terry who worked for me, and he wanted me to come up and speak and open the session, so I did. But I didn't really become active in the section until the late 90s, and I was asked to sit on the Water Utility Council. But I can tell you that in the time that I was there, that I wasn't really an active volunteer. I still went to all of the annual meetings. I went to the national conferences. I believe that participating in those things, especially with a group like AWWA, allows you to learn. What the industry is doing, what the latest advances are, who the people in the industry are, and I think networking is very important. You have to remember, I came from the wastewater industry. I knew everybody in DEP, but I didn't necessarily know everybody in the water industry who was out there working. So it was very important for me to be involved. After working on the Water Utility Council for, I think, only a year, they decided that I should be chairman. And I began that chairmanship, which continued for almost 10 years. And they offered me the opportunity to be a trustee in the section, which I jumped at, and I greatly enjoyed that. And I can tell you that the efforts that I made being involved with AWWA are great. They're the fun things about working. I got to meet a lot of great people. I have a lot of friends from AWWA, and it's one of the reasons that I've continued to be active in AWWA, because it allows me to still see the same people, to socialize with them. I mean, I live at really the ends of the earth down here in Atlantic City, so there aren't a lot of AWWA people there. So if I didn't continue to be active, I wouldn't see a lot of them. But I think it's important to me that I be active, and I enjoy it.
Good. You know, when we talked on Friday about these questions, you know, one of the questions I asked you was, did you have a mentor? And you shared with me an interesting story about not particularly having a mentor, but having a series of people that influenced you. Could you share some light on that?
Well, as I worked for DEP, I can tell you that DEP wasn't much different then than it is today, and there wasn't somebody who sat down with me, who explained things and really helped me out and gave me guidance in their career. And you know, and it could also have been my fault. I'm not necessarily the easiest person to teach, but I did watch and see how other people operated, and most of them took time to talk to me, particularly in the wastewater field. There were two gentlemen who ran major utilities, Southside in Middlesex County and Silas Betkin at Passaic Valley, sewage commissioners, and I watched how they operated, and I listened to them, and I saw what their goals were, and they did take time. They treated me like an equal. Here were the guys that were, you know, really the leaders in that industry. And when I switched over with Atlantic City to the water industry, I really had the same kind of thing, seeing people like Wendell Limhofer, Dean Knoll, Tom Cawley. I mean, these people, I watched how they operated. Again, here I am, I'm not that old in 1980, I was 32 when I took that job. Here are the leaders in the industry who are talking to me like an equal and not necessarily mentoring me and spending that kind of time, but giving me a foundation to understand what the water industry was about, and just really the quality of people in the industry. And I remember hearing particularly Wendell talk a few times, and I was just wowed by the things that he had to say and really his perspective. And I think as you go through, especially as an engineer, I understand the engineering. I know how to make things happen and those kinds of things. But if you don't have the right perspective as you're operating, what's important, especially when you're running water is a consumer product. You have to be concerned about your consumers and how you deal with them, how you deal with the public, and how you deal with just the environment that you're dealing in. You need to have the right perspective. Otherwise, you can get really caught up in the little minutia and not really do your job and not really serve either the industry or the people that you're supposed to be serving.
Okay. So following up with that, what important memories do you cherish most from your career in New Jersey?
That's interesting. It's hard. I mean, I have a lot of memories from my career. I had a lot. And sometimes the ones that you remember the most aren't cherished memories, so to speak. I remember going to a public hearing in Cape May County when I worked for the state, and we were trying to build the county wastewater system, and there was a lot of issues there. We were doing projections for the county, and a woman stood up and she said, I have 17 children, and I don't understand how you can accurately predict population. So that was sort of one of my my memories. The other memories I have that I've enjoyed are really seeing other people talk, listening to them. As I mentioned, some of the things I listened to Wendell a lot. Whenever he talked, it was just his perspective on the career and on life and how he was doing things that always impressed me. And I remember, I think the first time I saw him, he was talking about just how you make decisions on use of water, especially during a drought, and the needs of a community. And he just went on, and it was just astounding his perspective on who needs water and where they are. And that's, but again, I'm an engineer. A lot of my fondest memories are actually building things. I like to build things. That's the reason I became an engineer. I thought I was going to build big buildings when I was in college, and I ended up building big wastewater plants and big water plants, and that's certainly been exciting. Finishing projects and fixing things and being able to do things to deliver a product to the consumer. Some of my memories are not necessarily of happy things. In the late 1970s, we had a significant leak in the system, and because of the way the system had been constructed, we had to really limit the flow into Atlantic City. Again, when I got to Atlantic City, the system was really, had not been taken care of. They spent minimal money for the prior 30 years, and we really need to make improvements. But you can't make all the improvements at once, so you take little pieces. This was an area of town where getting the flow all around town was difficult. This was our main feed into town where there was a break. And I had to I didn't want to shut off the town. So we went to rationing, and we tried to limit things. And I got called into the mayor's office. And I sat in the mayor's office at a full table around the conference. What are we going to do? And I'm telling you, I want to go to rationing. What I really want to do is I want to do a shutdown at a certain point. And the mayor at that time was Jim Whalen. He said, I'm not having the casinos closed under my watch. So I'm going, well, I don't know what to do. I mean, I'm struggling here to keep things going. And the county fire chairman, who was a guy named Whitey Schwartz, said, we want to hook up to Brigantine. And I said, okay, if that's what you want to do. And they really helped out. They hooked up to Brigantine. We brought water in from another side of town, because that's really where we were losing water. And it was just the effort. I was up all night that night because they came in to do the work late at night. They had the TV crews from Philadelphia actually brought in trailers. And they had their trailers set up, and I'd go from trailer to trailer, and I'd knock on the door, and I'd say, can I tell you anything? Can I update you? And that was another one of my philosophies, is to go to the press. If something bad was happening, go and tell them. Don't hide from them. Go and tell them, work with them. We actually ended up getting very good press from everything, in spite of the rationing. I think the fact that we didn't shut down the town helped, but the fact that we were always there and we were always working to fix this. And you know, I got a lot of rewards out of that personally, because I ended up, I'm not quite sure why it broke, but I blamed it on the contractor, and the contractor, we split the money. We were actually about 10 minutes from declaring the shutdown when I got in negotiation with the contractor to fix it. And they fixed it, and we moved on, and actually those facilities and what they were doing there are still there today. So there are, you know, and I can pick out a bunch of other cute little things that happened, but it was enjoyable, and I really enjoyed being in the environmental field. I can also go back to when I was first with DEP, and there, I'm trying to think of a good term. I mean, there were a bunch of young guys there that were very energetic, young engineers who were trying to do things, and I happened to get assigned to go to work to do things and become and work with the commissioner of DEP at that time, who was Dick Sullivan. And I mean, here I am. I've been out of college for a year. I know I don't know much, and I've been told to go to a meeting with the commissioner with a bunch of other people and to give him advice, to tell him what's going on in these projects. And I walk in and I met with him ahead of time, and he, again, like the other people I've met in the industry, and this is one of the reasons I like the industry, he was great. He didn't treat me like the little kid that I was. He treated me like an equal. I gave him the information on the projects he wanted to talk about, and I ended up meeting with him many times before he left office, and I ended up meeting with a lot of different commissioners while I was there, and having good rapport with them. And you know, I met him about 5 or 6 years after I left DEP. He was doing a program that I also was working on, and he remembered me, and we talked. And it, you know, just having that rapport with really the higher ups in the system really made my career memorable. And a lot of that came through working with AWWA and also my relations with a lot of people at DEP.
Thank you. We talked a little bit about balance of work and life. You want to share a few tidbits of information about that?
It is hard, and you have to know where you are. And the way I always look at it is, I run full speed. So when I'm home, I'm running full speed at home with my family. I want to work, I run full speed, and sometimes the trains crash into each other. But my feeling was, if I've done enough at home, I've made my balance at home, then when work comes up, I have to do that. As I said in that break in the late 90s, there was no thought, no discussion. I was there all night. There just was no question. On the other hand, if something critical happened with my family and I needed to be there, I was there. And fortunately, these didn't conflict too much, but I think you have to do your homework and your best effort wherever you are. And you know what? As I got later in my career, I realized that I was there for my family. And that's really much more important to me. You have to remember, I was 35 before I got married and almost 40 before I had kids. So I was used to working. I was used to doing those kinds of things. But you know what? Toward the end, I realized that that's what kept me motivated was my family, and making time for them was real important.
Thank you. So now, what advice do you have for those just starting their careers in the water industry?
Well, first I would tell them is it's a great industry to be in. There are a lot of great people, and I would advise them to learn. Don't be afraid of the higher-ups. Go and talk to them. See what they have to tell you, and to work hard. When I first started my career at DEP, I really didn't have a mentor. I didn't even really have a supervisor. I had people that showed me around, and I sort of made my own way. I was given assignments, things to work on, but I did them. But with the group of people that was there, you know, 5 o'clock came and most people left, and there was a group of 3 or 4 of us. We just stayed there. We stayed there and we talked about the industry and about the environment and what we should be doing. And we communicated with each other. And to me, that was great. And I would advise people, in any job you have, not to make it a 9-to-5 job. Make it a job that you're involved in, because you're going to be doing this for a long time. And I always held myself to my standards. As I worked and did things, I had a standard that I set that I had to accomplish, which was probably well over and above anybody else's. And I think that's what I would advise people to do. Don't do a job halfway. Do the whole thing. See it to the end. Make sure it's done, it's complete, and it's a job that makes you happy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Very important words.
Thank you.
And getting to our last question.
The last question.
The last question. What advice do you have for those who begin their retirement soon?
Well, anyone who's considering retirement soon, my advice is do it. Do it now, do it quickly. I left my job for a lot of different reasons. The timing was great, as I said before. My timing in life has always, through no effort of my own, has always been pretty good. And it was just the right time for me to leave the Atlantic City MUA, and it's been great. I do a lot of different things now. It's almost like I wonder how I had time to work before. I'm very busy, and it's just, it's good. But I'm an active person, and what I have told people is to have a plan. And the plan can change. You don't have to stick to the plan, but you need a plan if you're going to retire. And I've heard some really silly plans, but people who had a plan, stuck to the plan, were happy. And if you have a plan what you're going to do, you will be happy. I mean, my plan was to do a little work, do a little consulting, to stay active in AWWA and a couple other groups that I belong to, play a little golf, do a little reading, work on my house, and I've been doing all that. And it's been a lot of fun, and it's been very mellow, and I've enjoyed it. So I would advise people who are ready to retire, everything is falling in line for them, to do it, but make a plan. Know what you're going to do, and even if you do less or more, that you've got a plan to follow. And even if you change it, I mean, maybe your plan is to see gardens all around the country, and you decide that you'd rather see baseball parks. Okay. You can change your plan, but you need a plan.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Neil. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'd like to welcome Jim Glozzy today. Jim Glozzy was responsible for overseeing operations of the regulated water and wastewater systems in northern New Jersey, as well as public-private partnerships with United Water, Jersey City, Hoboken Water Services, and United Water Rahway. Mr. Glozzy is an accomplished engineer with over 35 years of experience and has a proven track record in all aspects of water utility management and urban water systems. Please join us as John Dyksen interviews Jim Glozzy.
Jim, you've been retired now for a little over a year. How's retirement treating you?
Well, yeah, you're right. I have been retired about a year and a few months. I retired at the end of 2013. And I've been working a little bit with United with a contract, several hours a month. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, it's been, I like the idea of working on a contract, and the fact that I kind of pick my hours and I work from home for the most part, do a lot of field work. Mm-hmm. But I also like the fact that I could do whatever I want during the day, going down the shore quite a bit, mm-hmm. a little fishing, a lot of golf.
Oh, wow. Sounds good.
Recently, shoveling a lot of snow, yeah. But it's been great. I wouldn't trade it for the world right now. Love it.
So now it's a year that you've been retired about, but you were working for a little over 40 years, I guess, right?
Yeah, just about 40 years. I had a few years in the consulting industry, mm-hmm. And then I had a little over 35 years with United Water. When I started there, it was Hackensack Water Company, okay. So it goes back a ways.
How did you go from the consulting industry into the water industry? Can you tell us how you got started in the water industry that way?
It's pretty interesting because when I came out of school, I graduated from Rutgers, and I graduated as a structural engineer. And at the time when I came out, I wasn't even sure I wanted to be in engineering. I did a little bit of work with a small company up in Parsippany, Kanger Spector, for about a year. And then I went over to Good Kind and O'Day in Clifton, mm-hmm. and I was actually a structural engineer for them. I was designing and inspecting bridges, so that was a lot of fun. And then just one day, I liked what I did at Good Kind and O'Day, but I looked and I noticed that they had an ad in the paper for a structural engineer for a water utility in Bergen County, which is a little bit strange, yeah. because you wouldn't think of a structural engineer in a water utility, but they were looking for somebody to work under dams, design buildings, long span pipes. Mm-hmm. So I thought it was exciting, did the interview, got the job, and I'll tell you what, it turned out that besides a lot of the structural work I did, it kind of expanded me into every aspect of engineering. So it was a lot of fun, and then ultimately, besides engineering, I moved into management of staff and working very closely with customers and politicians.
Really varied career from consulting and bridges, and then various things that you did at United Water as well, and going from actually design in the engineering group to upper management and being part of the upper management team.
Absolutely.
What changes or circumstances most influenced you while you were in the water industry?
Well, the industry changed. I would say it changed dramatically, but it's still a water utility, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. in the fact that we still always have to deliver good, safe, potable water to our customers. But things changed dramatically in the fact that when I first started out, we didn't have to deal with the public. The communication was a little mm-hmm. bit different. Yeah. Of course, the public was always concerned about their water and how safe it was and how much they had. But as the years went on, and with the change in communications, with with phones, with Facebook and Twitter and all the newest technologies mm-hmm. for communication, the public really gets involved now in the water industry. They want to know why their rates are going up. They want to know what major projects are being planned, and how much water they have, and why. Why is everything happening the way it is? What about conservation? So the communication is probably one of the biggest things that changed in the industry, besides the fact that regulations have changed dramatically and have become much more rigid. Again, protecting the public. So the change in the regulations has really changed the way we do business.
And that's another question we're going to ask is the regulatory climate. Certainly that has become more stringent, especially with water treatment. And you probably saw that at the Haworth plant, and that resulted in the major upgrade that we did about 8 years ago, I guess.
Yeah, it was completed in 2010. But besides the fact that the regulations have become stricter, and they do, and we could talk a little bit about that, the fact is the regulators have actually become a lot more hands-on. They've gotten much more involved in the operation of companies. They don't actually operate it, but they tell us some of the things that they want us to do, where in the past they may not have done that the way they're doing it now. And that's because of political pressure, and that's because of customer pressure. But on the regulatory side, like you said, John, the regulations have gotten much more stringent over the years. Back in the 90s to where we are now, water quality now that has to go out of a plant is 10 times better than it was back in the 90s, just by the change in the turbidity numbers.
Yep.
And you talk a little bit about the Haworth plant. The Haworth plant was upgraded, completed in 2010, and was probably one of the first plants in the country that had dissolved air flotation, which was the newest piece. We had ozonation, all that in one treatment, besides regular filtration and settling that went through the plant. So it was a major upgrade for a plant that was 200 million gallons a day, serving a population of over 750,000.
Right.
So that was a tremendous upgrade for the United Water Company.
Okay. Within the 35 years, would you say that the atmosphere of work at the utility changed? That the pace of the work, things like that, has any change there in that you saw in 35 years?
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, I started out in engineering. I worked in the engineering department for a long, long time. Probably 16 of the years I worked in the engineering department before I moved into management of the operating systems. But the pace changed dramatically. Working with the union staff, the personnel people there changed dramatically. They all got more involved in everything that had to be done. And with the change in technology, with the change in the use of computers and everything else, everything was much more fast-paced because, you know, in the past you would send a memo that might take 3 or 4 days to get to somebody's desk. Now it takes couple seconds, and they expect a response in 10 minutes.
Yeah, right.
So that alone just dictates that the pace has to be faster. Plus the fact that, you know, I worked in a utility a long time, you did. I don't think it was ever an 8 to 4 job. No matter how fast paced it was, you always had you're always working long hours. You're always working emergency shifts.
Yeah, on call basically, right?
On call. And emergencies nowadays, if they're not taken care of immediately, they're all over the paper.
Yep.
Right? As a water utility back in the 70s, 80s, and even in the early 90s, we were kind of off the scope of everybody's, what everybody was looking at. Once we started getting into the later 90s with the change in communications, you saw that we were right out there in the public's eye. You had a main break that lasted more than a couple hours. You were you were on the back page of the local news.
Sure.
So things changed dramatically.
Let's switch a little bit to AWWA. You've been involved in AWWA during these years that you've been with the utility. Can you describe your experience with that organization and how that has influenced or impacted, helped you in your job at United Water?
Yeah, well, you know, I've been in a company for 35 years in the water industry, been with the AWWA for probably at least 20 plus of those years. And the one thing I always noticed about AWWA is the the resources you could go to at AWWA. You have professionals that are there with a lot of experience. You could talk to anyone. You may think you have a unique problem, but there's somebody at AWWA that's going to be able to help you. And so everything you know that you think is unique is not unique to somebody.
Sure. Yep.
It's a great group of professionals, particularly the group in New Jersey. I think it's a close-knit group.
Yep.
It's not a real big group. I think we all know most of the players in AWWA in New Jersey, and we've worked with them at some point in our careers. So there's always somebody you could fall back on and say, I think he might have had the same problem I did. And there's always been, they always like to help you. Everybody's out there to help you. I know just working at United, if I needed professional help, if we had an emergency, I could go right through the companies where I met all the people through AWWA, and somebody's going to be there to help us out. So it's been a great experience for us, and I think that's what the younger people have to realize going forward. That's a great group to get information from.
Okay. Well, following up on that, what would you say would be some of the best memories that you have working in the water industry and being involved in AWWA? What do you remember the most? What stands out in your mind about your career?
I could say the parties.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. That's the parties at the New Jersey section meeting, right?
Yeah, the parties at the New Jersey section meeting. No, but
or the golf outings, right?
The golf outings, right? Yeah, we had some good golf outings.
Yeah,
we did. They were a lot of fun. Didn't help me in my golf game, but they were a lot of fun. But
it did help you in your job, though, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, you had to be focused on right, focused on where you're hitting the ball and things like that. I mean, that all had to help.
It was good networking.
Right. There you go. Right, exactly.
But I have a lot of great memories in the industry overall, and a lot of good memories working with AWWA. The conferences have always been great at AWWA, but some of the memories I have at the time, they didn't seem like great memories because you're in the middle of a major emergency. But after you look at it, you say, wow, that went well, and we really learned something about that. One I could pick out right off the top. I was, again, still a young engineer, and United Water had its first union strike back in 1984. And for the most part, I was an office engineer. I worked a little bit with the operations people, but I never operated a plant, and they put me in a plant. So I operated the Haworth plant with somebody from legal department.
Oh, that sounds good.
So there you have a lot of expertise running a plant.
Of course.
And that was the Haworth plant that was pushing 60 million gallons a day out. So I learned an awful lot just during that on how the operations worked, how the emergency systems worked. We did flood the plant one night, but the water still was good going out of the plant. But we overflowed a few filters, but that was one interesting one.
And I understand they fed you well during those periods,
right? And they fed us very, very well. We ate an awful lot. We slept at the plant because they were at least minimum 12-hour shifts. And in the beginning, they were actually running 18 to 24 till they could get more people to help. And this went on for 3 months. So
I'll bet I know where you slept, in the filter beds.
The ones that we drained? No, we slept behind the data board. We used to have the old now we have SCADA systems and computer systems. In those days, we had a big data board that would show the tanks and the pumps and all the piping networks, besides all the filtration equipment and everything in the plant. So we slept behind those data boards. So sleeping on a cot and hearing all night was a lot of fun. So there was one other one too. There's many, and I think we just learned a lot about it. In 1996, we had the largest main break in United Water history that occurred. We had a 60-inch main break coming right out of our main plant in Haworth at the time. And we lost water to about 250,000 people for over 3 days. And there was a lot of pressure to get that done. I was I was director of engineering at that time, and it was my responsibility to get the pipe back in place. So, worked very, very well with our staff out there. Our operations people did a tremendous job. But it did take us almost 3 days to get the water back to all those people. So we learned a lot. Besides the fact on how to operate in an emergency, we learned about communications because we had every news group in New York hovering over us throughout the days.
I remember that, yeah.
Besides the politicians saying, what happened, what did you do wrong? And besides your own bosses saying, you better get this done within the next couple hours or else the company is going to have a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of pressure, but I didn't know. We learned a lot through emergencies, and I learned that we have a great staff working at our company. And overall, I think from my standpoint, the biggest things I miss was working with everybody at United. We had a great professional group there.
You talked about learning a lot, over your career. Was there any one person or two people that you might say were your mentors that you really learned a lot about the industry and about that helped you and the things that they taught you helped you to grow and to move up in the organization?
Yeah. Well, John Dyksen.
Wait a minute. You're older than me.
I had, when I first, I came in the engineering department, I had several bosses, but I had one just before I became director, Richard Hench. Richard was my director at the time. I was a manager, and he was excellent. He would help me through anything. He kept me calm in emergencies, and he was very, very smart on all aspects of engineering in a water company. And the other one too, as I got into management and operations, was Bob Iacula.
Okay, sure.
Bob is the senior executive vice president for United Water. He's held many high-level positions, and he's just always been there for me no matter what I needed, and has always been a calming influence and a support to anything I ever did.
Okay, good. What would you advise somebody coming into the water industry today? Somebody coming out of college, and how would you advise them in terms of a career in the industry and how you would go about working in the water industry?
Well, I think our industry is always changing. But it always changes, but it always kind of remains the same. I think one of the things you really, a young person coming in really has to find, as we talked about, a mentor, or find experienced people that they could work very closely with, because there's a lot of, our industry has a lot of old systems out there.
I thought you were going to say old people, but...
Well, besides old people, but it has a lot of old systems, and those people that have experience, those technicians, those operations people, and those engineers are the people you really have to go to and rely on, so you could learn from them.
Okay.
That's what you really have to do. The technical people coming out of school know a lot of stuff, but they really have to know a lot more about the system and the people have operated over the years.
Okay. All right. Well, really appreciate your time today, Jim, and appreciated your contribution to the industry, and hope that you have a very exciting and a long retirement. So thanks a lot, Jim.
Great. Thank you, John. Appreciate it.
I'd like to welcome John Dyksen today to be interviewed for the Living History Project. John Dyksen has over 35 years of experience in the water industry. He has had the opportunity to work both for a water utility and for consulting firms. He has served at both the local level for AWWA and is a recognized leader on a national level. Please join us today as we hear about John Dyksen's career. So I'd like to get us started with, why did you get involved in the water industry?
I don't think it was a reason for me getting involved. I started my career in consulting, and actually at Malcolm Perney, I was working on wastewater work and some stormwater work, and then they decided to form a water group doing water treatment projects. And I was invited to be involved in that group, and it sounded like a good thing to get into. And that's really how I got started in water. And ever since then, which is probably for 39 of my 40 or so years, I've been in water.
So seizing the opportunity when you saw it, but you just didn't kind of like let it seize you. You kind of grabbed it and really made something of it, right? There were probably other people that you took a special interest because you are really a recognized leader both locally and nationally. So maybe you can describe how you kind of channeled that and used that opportunity.
Well, Malcolm Perney had hired Alan Hess from the city of Philadelphia.
Right.
And Alan was well known in the industry, nationally and even internationally. And he was going to head up the group. And so I took advantage of that and thought, wow, this is a great opportunity to get on the ground floor of a new group and to work with someone like Alan Hess. And so that's what I did. And that just, you know, my career just built on that. And
So,
I need to put that back.
So the issue of, was Alan, would you describe Alan as a mentor for your program?
Definitely, he was a mentor. Alan not only gave me guidance and advice in working on projects, but when I went to national, let's say AWWA conferences, I would go around with Alan. He would introduce me to people, got me involved in committees, and really Alan was the one who got me jump-started in the association and went on from there.
So maybe Alan should be somebody that we put on the next candidate as kind of somebody to think about, but that is great. So they just didn't leave you on your own. Sometimes we think of mentoring as being a passive activity, but the mentor, so Alan was active in your career?
Definitely. Definitely I have to give a lot of credit to Alan for helping me to connect me with different people. He had a great network, right. And he allowed me to plug into that network with him, and then I just started to get involved in committees and know people, and gradually I could have my own network, and it really worked out great. And I really owe a lot to Alan, and he still is a great friend.
Oh, that's terrific. What changes have you seen in either professionally in the business, you know, over the last 30, 40 years?
Well, I think in the water industry, the industry has the pace has sped up a lot. When I first went into the water industry, and I came from consulting, which was a very fast pace, and as you know, being a consultant, you know, writing proposals and meeting deadlines for projects, it wasn't the same in the water industry. But over the years, it's gotten more competitive, especially in the private industry, and as a result, the pace has really sped up a bit in the water industry, and not to the point where we're like a consulting industry, but still it's much faster pace, and I think certainly that is something that I've seen change, and I'm glad I'm not just starting right now, and glad I'm finishing up my career.
All right. Have you seen, technology? Maybe you can describe a little bit about that, because you were always kind of on the process side of things. Maybe you can describe some of the things you've seen, and maybe also where you think things may be going. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think certainly process-wise, things have gotten faster as well. We've been looking at higher loading rates for different processes, and trying to treat more water, developing processes that will give us better quality water, but still in the same footprint, because a lot of treatment plants have been around for a long time. And even though they've got to meet more stringent regulations, there's not a whole lot of land around them. And so we've been looking at higher treatment rates and putting in things like membranes, which are certainly a much higher rate. So that certainly has changed. And the other thing is instrumentation control, more automation of processes, to try and tighten those processes, to optimize them as much as possible, to not only create better water, but at a lower cost.
So we have this instrumentation piece, which is, I'd like to kind of go down that road a bit, yet we have the operators, and we just heard Jim Glozzy speak about the role of the operator, and maybe you can comment about the level of instrumentation and maybe your take on the role of the operator and the need for the operator, because in some ways, potentially, if we have the young people out there, they may think that we could operate the plant without an operator, and we have technology and the smart computer. Maybe your take on the role of the operator now and the importance of them.
There still is a matter of judgment that the operator has to make in terms of making chemical changes or making changes in the filtration rates, things like that. And years ago, there wasn't as much operator training as there is now. In fact, in the American Waterworks Association, there wasn't really a lot of attention paid to the operator. And nowadays, there are sessions at the local, state section meetings and in national that are just focusing on the operator, because there's really a lot more need for operator training because the technologies have become more complicated. And the other thing is that the margin of operation has really tightened a bit. And whereas in the past, you could put out a good quality water that met regulations, and the margin of safety was pretty large, whereas now it's not nearly as large. And so it's really important that the operator be trained and know something about the process. Okay. Whereas in the past, they really didn't know much about the process, just making, changes, dials, whatever. Now there's a lot more data coming to the operator. You really need to know what you're doing in order to meet the regulations and put out a good quality water.
So having that plant just take remote control and having the instrumentation be like 2001, The Space Odyssey is probably not going to happen. So if we can speak about the regulations, John, about where they're going and where you think they could use some revision?
Sure. Not only have the regulations come down in terms of the numbers, more stringent numbers, but in the past, we've focused mostly on the water coming out of the treatment plant. Now we're looking at the water quality in the distribution system and right out to the customer's taps. And that puts a whole new perspective on treatment and on the operation of the distribution system, that we're looking at trying to maintain water quality so that it doesn't deteriorate from the time that it leaves the plant to the time that it gets to the customer's taps. And that means that anything that we do at the water treatment plant, we've got to be aware of what type of change might occur in the distribution system, because it's not just a matter of, okay, we're making a change at the plant, maybe adding another chemical or something, but that could have a consequence out in the distribution system. We want to know what that is, because we are now required to take samples out in the system. And the other thing is that the customer is looking for better water quality, and we know that from the sales of bottled water. So we're competing against that quality, and we need to make sure that the quality that the customer sees at the tap is the highest that we can make it, because they're going to complain, and we want them to be satisfied with what they get at their taps.
So those unintended consequences that you kind of saw, and having kind of the wisdom of experience and looking at somebody else's mistakes. Maybe you can describe, some of the signature moments in your career and why they were signature moments.
Well, I think one of the things working as a consultant was actually working on some work that was related to the regulations, developing what they called cost and technology documents for the US EPA. And that really got me involved with the federal regulators in developing regulations and actually looking at all the different types of treatment processes. And it really broadened my sphere of treatment, looking at whatever treatment might be available to meet some of these new regulations. And I think that was certainly a highlight of my career in doing that. And then applying the knowledge that I gained from that work to actual treatment plants and where they were upgrading their processes. The other thing that really got me going was looking at a specific process, air stripping, and also granular activated carbon for the removal of volatile organic chemicals from groundwater. That's something that started to appear back in the early 80s. And working on those technologies really got me involved in the industry. And I was making presentations at the national conferences and making presentations around the country for EPA. Okay. And that really got me into those technologies and helped me with the removal of volatile organic chemicals from groundwater. Another one I think a high mark was, as Jim had mentioned before, the upgrade of the Haworth water treatment plant. That was a $95 million project done over several years, and we added dissolved air flotation, we upgraded the ozone system, we added a new sludge handling and processing system, and that was really a big project and a real successful project in my career.
Well, those are great. Maybe now, Jim mentioned also some of the emergencies. Were there things that kind of lessons learned that you, maybe one anecdote you could share about something that you gained some experience from maybe something that may not have seemed that simple to solve? Well,
actually, my experience at Ridgewood Water Department, it wasn't really a crisis, but it could have been. There were some instances of giardiasis that some people had gotten, and right away the doctors said, oh, it comes from the drinking water. And so we started to get inundated with calls about that and what were we doing. And it really helped me to learn about giardia and how it could get into the water supply. And it also taught me a lot about communications and how to communicate with the media and with the customers to convince them that it really wasn't coming from the water supply. Okay. And that certainly was something major that happened that could have been a serious media issue, and we were able to keep that under wraps, so to speak. So
that's great. I'd like to now change it to some non-technical questions. The issue, the balancing work and family life, and I'll relate that I remember also in addition to working on a little EPA project that we did together. We played softball together. I remember back in the day, and it was that no umpire league, and that's when I met your children. And maybe you can describe the role of family life, work life, especially when you brought up the issue of new technology, kind of the constant demands, and how you managed to strike your balance, and what advice you give to younger people today.
Well, I think that's a very important thing to make that balance, because if you just focus on your career, and somebody said to me once, you know, when you're retired and you're sitting around talking to somebody, you're not going to be talking about what you did 40 years ago or 30 years ago. You're going to be talking about your family. And God has blessed us as a family. We've got 5 children. We've got 1 adopted child. We've got 11 grandchildren. And that's really, you know, what I tried to focus on. Work obviously was something that I had to do. But one of the things that I did throughout my career was, as things got maybe more focused on my career, I was able to change jobs and be home more. And one was when I actually got into the water industry itself, when I went from Malcolm Perney to Ridgewood. It was right at a time when our kids were starting to play sports in high school. And I was doing a lot of traveling with Malcolm Perney, and this was an opportunity for me to stay in the industry, but to stay home more. And I got to see our kids play sports, and they still tell me today that they don't forget the times that we were out there watching them. And I seem to be able to do that. The Lord was able to provide jobs where I could stay home, not travel as much. And I think that was really important in my career. That if I had stayed at Malcolm Perney, I probably would have been traveling all over the country and not have been home as much. And I think that was a real big turning point in my career.
So being flexible and listening to your family, listening to your inner voice to find out what you're being called to do, and then being willing to make a change. And as we wrap up, John, and it's tough to summarize a career in 40, 30 years in one snippet, but if you had to give one piece of advice to the middle-aged people, the young people, what would that be?
Well, I think that if you could work for a utility, I think that is something that is very important, because working for a utility, you can then work for another utility, or your value to a consulting firm is much greater. And I think the second thing is getting involved in AWWA, because you develop a network, get involved, don't just go to the conferences, but get involved in committees. You get to work for different people and with different people. You get to meet people that you can call up at any time and get advice from. I think that is really important. That has been a real help for my career, is getting involved in AWWA, not just the section, but in national as well.
Well, John, thank you very much for joining us today, and all the best in your retirement.
Okay, thanks, John.
Thank you.